Today we are continuing to read Hunting for Hidden Gold by Franklin W. Dixon. When we last heard about the Hardys, they were trapped in a mine. Chapter 10, Ambush Trail. A pang of fear shot through Frank and Joe as they realized they were trapped in the mine. A clump of brush partly screened the tunnel's mouth, but the Hardys' enemies were waiting outside, ready to seize the boys the moment they appeared. Scarcely daring to breathe, the boys listened as the thin man went on. "I figured it was them Hardys eavesdropping at the grave the other night. He laughed. Pretty smart on me giving out the hint about Brady's mine, eh?"
"I fell for it all right," his partner agreed. "That crowbar business too, with a phony code. Best part is, it'll look accidental."
The boys heard a deep-throated chuckle. Joe shot a shamefaced glance at his brother. The crowbar must have been painted to attract their attention and then cunningly planted at a weakly shored part of the tunnel. The thin man continued, "I'll really get a kick out of paying off those brats. Big Al was plenty sore at me because of that shotgun setup in the copter didn't work out."
"It wasn't your fault, Slim."
"Try telling that to Al. He was mad over Slipgun not getting the boys last night. Now he blames me for wasting this morning."
"How come?"
That special business he keeps harping on. It's all he thinks about. He wants us to do some searching elsewhere today, but the Hardys come and change his plans." There was silence for a while. Frank and Joe waited tensely, digesting what they had overheard. Then Slim spoke again. "Wonder how much longer we're going to have to wait. I'm getting fed up perched here in the cold."
"Maybe the kids can't find their way out," his partner suggested. "If they ain't dead already, that is."
"Are you sure the tunnel caved in, Jake?"
"Sure. Sounded like an earthquake. I can see dust coming out of the front end."
"Do you make certain the tunnel was completely blocked?"
Slim asked. "Well, I didn't go inside, look, like I might have gotten trapped. Besides, they didn't show up."
"You chowderhead," Slim exploded irritably. "If it ain't blocked, the kids may still be able to squirm out. Go back and make sure."
Okay.
Jake sounded as he was getting to his feet. "Wait, I got another idea. You fetch the horses and bring them back here before you check the tunnel," Slim added. "That way, there'll be no chance of the Hardys pulling off a sneak." After warning Joe to be silent, Frank wriggled forward and peered through the screen of brush. In the distance, he could see Jake's stocky figure heading down the snow-covered mountainside on his way to the mine entrance. Frank was astonished at how far Jake had gone in a few seconds. Since the two men had conversed in low voices, the speakers had sounded as if they were fairly close to the clump of brush. Now, Frank realized his mistake. The opening was on one side of a narrow draw. Slim had evidently perched out of sight somewhere higher up on the mountainside, probably holding a rifle to cover the boys. The two men must have thought their conversation was inaudible to anyone else, but the steep-sided draw had caused an echo effect, trapping their voices and reflecting the sound back toward the tunnel. Frank signaled his brother to crawl forward and join him. Stealthily, Joe complied. Several minutes later, Jake returned, leading the boys' horses. Slim came down the slope to meet him.
"No sign of them," the Hardys heard Jake report.
"Check inside the tunnel," Slim told his partner. "If they didn't get buried by the cave-in, we're supposed to take them up to Windy Peak." The thugs exchanged one or two other remarks, but their conversation was carried away by a surge of icy wind sweeping down the draw. Jake turned and started off again, heading back to the mine entrance. Slim threw a glance towards the clump of brush to make sure their quarry had not yet emerged. He then took the boys' horses and trudged towards the stunted, leafless tree growing outside of the mountain.
"Let's jump him," Joe urged.
Frank had noticed that the man wore a long-barreled revolver in a holster slung on his hip. If he had a rifle, he might have left it at the spot where he and Jake had been waiting. "It's risky, but we'll try," Frank agreed. The moaning of the wind would help cover the sound of their footsteps in the snow, and Slim's back was turned as he prepared to tether the horses to a tree. Jake was already out of sight behind the shoulder of the hill. "It's now or never," Frank hissed. Slithering from the hole and past the screen of brush, the boys darted towards the slope. They were halfway to the man when one of the horses suddenly detected the boys and whinnied. Slim muttered an oath, jerked the horse roughly by its bridle. He seemed to realize that something was behind him and had startled the animal. The man whirled, his hand streaking towards the gun on his hip. At the same moment, Frank hurled himself through the air in a flying tackle. Just as Slim yanked the gun from his holster, Frank rammed into him. In an instant, Joe had joined the fray. He stunned Slim with a backhanded smash to the side of his head. As the thug went limp, his revolver arced into the air and went hurtling down the mountainside. "Come on, grab your horse," Joe urged. "We've got to get out of here before Jake finds out what happened and starts firing at us." The boys quickly untied their mounts and swung into the saddles. The horses whinnied, then went galloping down the draw as Frank and Joe dug their heels into their horses' flanks. Frank threw a glance over his shoulder just in time to see Slim staggering to his feet. The man's face was livid with fury. "Jake!" he bawled out at the top of his lungs. "The Hardys are getting away!" His voice trailed off and was lost again by the wind. A moment later, a rifle crack echoed. But by now the boys were well out of range. "Did you spot the men's horses?" Joe called. "Up the mountainside, I think," Frank yelled back. "We better not count on a big lead." The boys pushed their mounts hard, taking desperate chances along the rocky declivities. No sounds of pursuits reached their ears, and gradually Frank and Joe slowed their pace. In about 20 minutes, they topped the ridge overlooking Lucky Lode and rode down the trail into town. As their horses clip-clopped along the main street towards Hank's cabin, Frank asked, "Did you hear what that fellow Slim said about taking us to Windy Peak?" "I sure did," Joe returned. "It could mean that's Al's hideout. Let's search up there." Frank nodded. "It'll be an overnight trip. We'll need supplies." The boys were surprised to find a battered blue station wagon parked in front of their cabin. Doc Whitlow's here," Hank explained when they went inside. He's with your pa now." "Is Dad worse?" Frank asked, concerned. "Not exactly. He's been kind of restless tonight. This morning he felt like he was run down with a slight fever, so I fetched the doc." Minutes later, the physician, a young man with a brown beard, emerged from Mr. Hardy's room. "Nothing to worry about," Doc Winslow announced. "Apparently your father overexerted himself yesterday and irritated the fracture." "He shouldn't have worked on that wall," Frank said. "I gave him something to ease the pain," the doctor said. "He's sleeping now." Doc Whitlow declined Hank's offer of lunch, saying he had to get back to the office in the nearby town of Bear Creek. After he had left, Frank prepared a meal of beans and frankfurters and sat down to eat with Frank and Joe. "You boys just missed seeing Bob Dodge," he remarked. "When was he here?" Joe asked. "Just a while before you two showed up. Say, you boys looked like you'd been through the mill. What happened?" The Hardys related all that had taken place the night before, as well as the entrapment at Brady's mine and their narrow escape from the two gang members, Slim and Jake. Hank, too, was puzzled by the shadow of the bear reference. The boys asked him to pass on a full report to their father. "Oh, you mean you won't be around to tell him?" "We're going up to investigate Windy Peak," Frank replied. "The sooner the better." A worried look spread over the Westerner's leathery face. He urged the boys to be extremely cautious now that the gang was clearly trying to get rid of them. He agreed to provide them supplies for the trip, however, and to lend them his mare, Daisy, for use as a pack horse. Soon the boys were ready to start. "What's the easiest way up Windy Peak, Hank?" Joe asked as he tightened the cinch. "Ain't no easy way this time of year," the man replied. "You'll have to take an old Indian path called Ambush Trail up near Brady's mine. Starts about half a mile north of the mine entrance, but watch your step." "Bad going?" Frank put in. "Plenty bad. Even in the summer, that trail's full of narrow ledges and hairpin turns. Now, it'll be a lot worse. We had a freak thaw earlier this month, and that's probably loosened quite a few boulders. Some of the places you'll be on the icy ledges looking down straight down the side of the cliff." Hank's warning proved to be fully justified. At first, the trail seemed to be fairly easy, but as they left the timber line behind, the path narrowed and wound confusingly in and out of the rocky outcrops of the face of the mountain. "I'll bet even the Indians get lost sometimes here on this snaky trail," Joe remarked wryly. On their left, the mountain towered sheer above them with precariously poised boulders and crusted drifts of snow. Half-dislodged clumps of earth and rock projected from the cliffside. "This would be a bad place to get caught in an avalanche," Frank observed. Joe gulped. "Whew, don't even think of it." Presently, the boys saw horseshoe prints in the snow. Apparently the riders, whoever they were, had cut in from some side path. "At least we seem to be on the right trail," Joe said tensely. Probably members of the gang, Frank cautioned. We better keep a sharp lookout. The prints faded out presently as the path became more glazed and rocky. Soon the trail narrowed so much that the boys were forced to proceed single file. Both gulped as they glanced down the cliff at the icy river below. Joe was close behind Frank when Frank turned a sharp corner in the trail and reined into a halt. Ahead was a huge barrier of snow, rocks, and logs. It must have been an avalanche, Joe said. Frank moved forward for a better look. Maybe not, he commented. Those logs don't look like windfalls. They could have been cut by men. Anyhow, our trail looks blocked. After sizing up the situation, Frank and Joe decided to risk skirting the curve of the hillside, which seemed less steep at this point. Maybe we can get back on the trail somewhere else beyond the barrier, Joe said hopefully. Dismounting, the Hardys started cautiously downward. Frank went first, leading his horse and Daisy. Joe followed with his mount. For a while, the footing seemed fairly sure. The Hardys had negotiated their way around part of the slope when Frank suddenly felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Look out, Joe," he cried. "There's loose shale under this snow." A spatter of stones and earth went clattering down the mountainside. As the brothers scrambled for safer ground, their mounts became panicky, neighing and pawing wildly for a foothold. The horses bucking dislodged yet more shale. The next instant, the horses and boys went slipping and sliding down the landslide. All three of the animals went over their sides in a swirl of flying hooves. Frank and Joe were half stunned as they tumbled down the mountainside. Below was an icy creek. Suddenly, they were sailing through the air. The Hardys and their horses shattered the ice and disappeared below the mountain torrent.